Hey, this is Steve Smith with Applicant Pro with another edition of Inside MFG. So on this edition today, we're going to kind of continue the ghosting idea that we had brought up in a previous edition. And specifically though, this covers the interview process. Now this is an important area because oftentimes when we think of ghosting, that's the first place we think of is actually the interview process. Because it's at this stage when you're either trying to conduct a phone interview or you're trying to bring somebody in for a face-to-face interview that you start calling them and suddenly they disapparate. You know what's funny about disapparate? Did you know that disapparate was created by J.K. Rowling in the Harry Potter series? It's not an actual word, but yet we all know what it means. So thank you, J.K. Rowling, for helping us understand disapparation. So with this being said, the question you need to ask yourself is this. What does it feel like to interview with my organization? And here's some interesting studies that we have found. So in these studies, we have found that managers are not always fully vested in the interview process. So what does that actually mean? What does it mean that they're not fully vested? Well, together with Gallup and some of our own research, and just yesterday I confirmed with Utah Tech with this, the school down there, this research actually shows that one of the number one reasons why an applicant gets kind of frustrated during the interview process and leads to a high potential of ghosting is that your manager who is responsible for the actual interview is buried in admin tasks. Part of those admin tasks are so disruptive that during the interview, sometimes they'll get a text message, sometimes they'll get an email, sometimes somebody will knock on the door and interrupt, right? And so when these things are happening and the manager gets distracted from the interview, that's a huge turnoff to the applicants that are applying for the position. Because what they're seeing, the impression that they're getting is that you're not fully invested in me. You don't really care about me from an interview perspective. And when you ask the questions and I'm expressing my answers to those questions and you're looking off or you're checking your cell phone or you're answering an email or something like that on your computer, that becomes a huge issue. And applicants feel that during the interview process. It was the number one complaint. Almost 70% complained about that part of the process that led to the reasons why they ghosted the employer later on because of that poor connection with the actual manager. This is huge because if you think about that, if you're buried in all of these admin tasks, especially the hiring manager or the person involved in the hiring process, you're losing out on a tremendous opportunity to really talk about your organization. Now, there are 3 additional elements when it comes to the interview process. The next one is brand champion. Your hiring manager and the individuals that are involved in that process are your brand champions. They're the ones that can talk about your organization. And so sometimes we forget that we need to prepare them for that. You need to train your managers or train those involved in the hiring process to be able to talk about your organization in a positive way. And it's amazing to me how many managers I meet with or organizations that I meet with that kind of have forgotten that part of the process. They just say, hey, go conduct the interview and let me know if they're a good fit. And there's none of this brand championing happening, right? You need to make sure that because they are your ambassadors of the organization, that they can really talk to the organization. Another thing is a concept called, I call it the Bob Rossing it. If you think about Bob Ross was famous because he had this ability to, it didn't matter what level you were at, within a half hour to an hour episode, you could paint happy little trees, as he called them. Anybody could paint, and he was convinced that anybody could learn how to paint, and his episodes would take people through that process and teach them how to do that. In the interview process, this is our opportunity to Bob Ross it. We can paint the picture of what it's actually like to work for the organization, what it's like to work in the actual department, and what it's like to work for you as the hiring manager or the actual manager. If you're not the one that that person is going to report to, you may want to consider having that person come in and be part of the interview process so they have an opportunity to actually see the individual that they're going to be reporting to. When you think about the reason why people leave their current organization and go to another position somewhere else or with another company, over 70% of them will tell you that it was because of a bad relationship that they have with their current supervisor, manager, or boss. If that accounts for 70% of the reason why people are leaving, don't you think that in the interview process it would be important to address that very issue? One of the best ways to do that is to have them come in, paint the picture, not only for that department, but for the individual that they might even be reporting to. Even if you have other employees that they're going to be working with in that department, that's a great place where they can also communicate and get to know some of the other people they might be working with who can also talk about that boss. So those are really important. The last thing is the influence. Managers have to have influence and be decision makers. Oftentimes applicants will have questions during the interview process, and when the manager doesn't know the answer, it just comes across as bad, right? When they don't know the answers and they don't have that authority to make those decisions, the candidates start getting some hesitations in their head. They're like, oh, they don't even know this? Ooh, I'm not sure about this. And you start creating doubt in the mind of the applicant. And remember, where there's doubt, there's a higher probability of ghosting. So during the interview process, these are the things you need to think about. Are we holding our managers accountable and making sure that they're aware that they are the brand champions, that they have an influence and decision making? Prepare them with some questions that they might be asking during the process, that the applicants might ask. Prepare them with answers that they can use during that process, so when they're Bob Rossing it and painting that picture, that they can do it effectively. And I promise you that will help them mitigate the ghosting. And ultimately, remember, make sure they're not buried in administrative tasks and that there are no distractions during the interview process. You do those things and you're going to mitigate ghosting 100%.